Hey, Stewart's Chapel, Brother Don here, and Don Counts, and we're at the Walps home, and we appreciate their hospitality. I want to share with you one of my favorite characters or stories in Scripture. If I could preach on it more often, I would. I enjoy it. This guy is so much like me, but I have found that often like a lot of other people I know. His name was Ahimaaz. Have you ever heard of Ahimaaz? He's in 2 Samuel. And actually, you find him several times in that 2 Samuel, but I'm in 2 Samuel chapter 18, verse 19 through 32. It's a lot of scripture, so let's go ahead and read it. Then Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, said, "Let me run now and take the news to the king. Now how the Lord has avenged him of his enemies." And Joab said to him, "You shall not take the news this day, for you shall take the news another day. But today you shall take no news, because the king's son is dead." So then Joab said to the Cushite, an Ethiopian, "Go tell the king what you have seen." So the Cushite bowed himself to Joab, and he ran. Well, Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, said again to Joab, "But whatever happens, please let me also run after the Cushite." So Joab said, "Why will you run, my son, since you have no news ready?" But Ahimaaz, being Ahimaaz, says, "But whatever happens," he said, "let me run." So Joab said to him, "Run!" Then Ahimaaz ran by the way of the plain, and he outran the Cushite. Now David was sitting between the two gates, and the watchmen went up to the roof over the gate to the wall, lifted their eyes, and they looked, and there was a man running alone. Then the watchmen cried out and told the king, and the king said, "If he is alone, there is news in his mouth." And he came rapidly and drew near. Then the watchman saw another man running, and the watchman called to the gatekeeper and said, "There is another man running alone." And the king said, "He also brings news." So the watchman said, "I think the running of the first man." Now, get this part now. This watchman on the wall says this. He can't see the guy. He can't make him out. He says, "I think the running of the first is like the running of Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok." And the king said, "He is a good man and comes with good news." So Ahimaaz called out and said to the king, "All is well." Then he bowed down with his face to the earth before the king and said, "Blessed be the Lord your God, who has delivered up the men who raised their hands against my lord the king." The king said, "Is the young man Absalom safe?" Ahimaaz answered, "When Joab sent the king's servant and me your servant, I saw a great tumult, a great fighting, a conflict, but I did not know what it was about." The king said, listen to what the king says, "Turn aside and stand here." So Ahimaaz turned aside, and he stood still. Just then the Cushite came, and the Cushite said, "There is good news, my lord the king, for the Lord has avenged you this day of all those who rose against you." And the king said to the Cushite, "Is the young man Absalom safe?" So the Cushite answered, "May the enemies of my lord the king and all who rise against you to do harm be like that young man." Well, the king was deeply grieved. You see, God had already told King David that the victory would be his. What King David was uncertain of, well, what would be the cost. You see, Absalom was his son. Absalom had raised up and rebelled against his own father, and Absalom died. Joab did not want Ahimaaz delivering that message. The king knew Ahimaaz and knew him as a good man with good news. And Joab did not want to, well, he didn't want him running. So he sent an Ethiopian, not an Israelite, he sent an Ethiopian. And the Ethiopian, well, he didn't understand that the news he carried was about the death of the son of the king. Well, Ahimaaz. You see, Ahimaaz was a professional runner. Back then, he was the mailman. He had no car, no horse. It was legs. He ran with messages so much that the watchman on the wall knew who he was, not because of the way he looked, not because of his clothes, not because of the sound of his voice, not because of his face, but because of the way he ran. He was always running. And when he comes to Joab, you want the images of this young man just jumping up and down, let me run, let me run. And Joab said, no, you're not going to run today. And he comes back again, let me run. And Joab says, no. And then he says, no, let me run. And finally Joab says, you just go ahead and run. But Joab tells him, you really don't have any reason to run, and you don't have a message to bring. Do you know that one of the things that probably one of the sin that I've noticed of ministers like me and of God's faithful and mature is that generally they're moving at full speed all the time. They're professional runners. They almost like they're in a hurry. You know why this story speaks to me? There are times when the king really doesn't want me running. He wants me to be still. Waiting on the Lord and being still in His presence is very hard for men like Ahimaaz. If you and I are going to walk worthy of our calling and following Christ, then we have to walk at the pace that God desires. And sometimes walking at the pace that God desires means being able to stand still. And not always being the runner, but always being obedient, always following the director. Are you Ahimaaz? You're so busy running you don't even know why you're running. Are you like that with your spouse? Are you like that with your kids? Are you like that in life? You don't even know why you're, at the end of the day, you're exhausted. Every day, you're exhausted. At the end of every week, you're exhausted. You're so exhausted that when it comes to the day for worship, you think about not going. Oh, you may still go, but you're so tired that when you finally sit and be still in that worship place, you have nothing to give God and you go to sleep. You've been running so much all week long that when you do come near to Him, you have nothing to give Him. Walking at His pace means sometimes we don't run. Love you, Stewart's Chapel.